Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to get started. This is our first council session in October. Welcome to October. We're going to begin our council session this afternoon with an invocation by Reverend Kenneth Nelson from the Seneca Community Church in Germantown. Please rise if you're able.
We pray for wisdom to enhance the common good of our county, that our actions reflect dignity we need, that our appointments and legislation improve the health and quality of life now and in the future. Let us, moreover, see that we have done more good than harm, and our legacy encourages excellence in governance and civil life.
Thank you so much. Okay, we're going to start with legislative session. This is day 23, call of bills for final reading. First item is expedited bill 19-19, economic development, workforce development amendments. The Fed and Education and Culture Committee recommends enactment. I'll turn it over to the chair of the Fed Committee.
Thank you, Council President. You may have some comments on this one, as I believe this was the legislation you introduced. The joint committees took this matter up, and we had a good discussion about workforce development. I want to just recognize Jerome Fletcher is here with the executive branch. The purpose of the legislation is to enable the county to designate an additional or an alternative organization as the workforce development entity, which is primarily related to the WIOA funding. We are required to designate an entity for WIOA funding that flows from the federal through the state to the county to help meet important workforce development needs. I guess, to be very plain, there's a lot of confusion at the moment about the county's workforce development strategy. I think many of us have ideas about what needs to happen, but we have not yet harmonized those into a clear, agreed-upon game plan. And we really do need to resolve that. The legislation is really important because it gives us, it's ahead of the curve, and it gives us a vehicle for the conversation about what our strategy should be in workforce development. And the chair of the Education Committee, Mr. Rice, and I have talked about, as has other members of the committee, Council President particularly, the need for perhaps Montgomery College to play a more significant role in meeting programs for example, the Tech Talent Pipeline. So there are a range of possibilities, but what we really need to do, in the bigger picture here is get on the same page, figure out how the executive branch views our path forward, figure out how we view that, and then really harmonize and move ahead. And we've got a lot of work to do on that front. There is an event toward the end of this month that WorkSource Montgomery is organized around workforce development. And there are many conversations that are happening now kind of all simultaneously. So we really need to make some strides. It was my understanding from reports that I had heard that the county executive had really expressed to the board of WorkSource Montgomery a strong desire for the organization to narrow its focus and to really just be dedicated to achieving more in the WIOA arena, and to get that program really where it needs to be, and not to implement other programs or pursue other program areas. But then I've heard from others that that was not necessarily the perception of the executive's comments from other people who were in the meeting. So we do really need to bring that all together. Which is to say, the reason I'm bringing this up, this legislation is an important vehicle for us to work on these challenges and try to resolve it. And it allows us to make changes in the future if that's how we think that ultimately we want the initiative to be structured. So I look forward to the meeting at the end of this month and generally to a number of different conversations over the course of this fall. And I really think we ought to have a strong goal of pinning down exactly how it's going to happen, really by the end of this calendar year. And I think that the big piece that we really need to layer into our strategy here is around the tech talent pipeline and how we are creating or recertifying the kinds of engineers and other tech talent that companies in that space really need to grow. So with that, the Joint Committee recommends this legislation and appreciates the sponsors for bringing it forward.
Thank you. Before I turn it over to Councilmember Rice, since I'm the one who introduced legislation, I'll just say that there is no doubt that we are really, truly focused right now and understand the urgency around ensuring that we move forward with a coherent and very strategic direction when it comes to workforce development. And so this particular legislation gives us some of that flexibility as we are moving forward with those kinds of conversations. Councilmember Jawando and I have also had conversations and meetings with the executive. Mr. Fletcher, you're here as well, really echoing what the council has been on record saying, that we really need to look at this effort as a continuum. It is a mistake to just focus on one particular area. We know that we're very fortunate in Montgomery County to have so many assets and also have a very diverse workforce. And by that I mean that we have folks who can be an entry-level, technical level, all the way up to postdoctorate and very high, level paying jobs. But we also have this pipeline that we can groom. And the good news is that we have a lot of assets. I think the work ahead that is urgent, as Councilmember Reamer had just described, that we really do need to figure this out and reach an agreement as soon as possible. There are some components that we have to definitely assess and evaluate. Again, this legislation simply gives us some flexibility as we are exploring this possible step forward, and definitely look forward to resolving this very quickly. This issue of workforce development is so pivotal to our economic development platform writ large. I mean, there is no doubt that we have got to get this going. We have to start reaching some milestones, achieving some of these metrics, because if not, then we're continuing to be in a sort of holding pattern, and that's not where we want to be. So this bill itself doesn't do much more than give us that flexibility, but there is no doubt that I assume in the next couple of weeks we're going to have to then really narrow down and finalize where we're taking this very important component of our economic development strategy here in the county. So I look forward to that resolution so that we can all get on the same page and move forward. So with that, Councilmember Rice.
Well, thank you very much, Madam President, and thank you to the chair of the Fed Committee as well. It's interesting because people, refer to workforce development, and I don't think a lot of people realize what it means and how significant it is to our community. And understanding that a person who's leaving a place like Clarksburg Jail who needs to be gainfully employed so that they're not committing recidivism and increasing those recidivism rates is incredibly important on so many levels, not just about that person being employed, but also about what it means to our greater community as a whole, reducing crime, reducing other issues that we have, making sure that our tax revenue is increased so that we have less need on those there are so many things that are all tied together, but yet it seems as though Workforce Montgomery doesn't get it. And it continues to be story after story that I continue to have my email box flooded with of where we're having missteps. And I'm completely frustrated and so just done. I'm so done. And so this is just the start. I can promise you that. This is just the beginning of where we're going in terms of revamping what's going to happen with workforce development in this county. I'm sick and tired of seeing the failed missteps that continue to happen that are jeopardizing people in our community. It just can't continue. And so if the county council has to continue doing things like this, I know and I've heard from the county executive his commitment to making some of these things happen. The reality is that I don't think they can happen under the current structure. I just really don't. And so from that perspective, I look forward to working with my colleagues. I really want to thank you, Madam President, for putting this first one out, but there are plenty more that need to be done. And, you know, I look forward to a time in which we can really say that when it comes to workforce development for some of our most vulnerable, for some of them who need it the most in our community, we're actually delivering for them, because we're not doing that now.
Thank you, Councilmember Rice. This is a roll call, so roll call vote.
Mr. Glass?
Yes.
Mr. Glass votes yes. Mr. Jawando? Yes. Mr. Jawando votes yes. Mr. Hucker? Yes. Mr. Hucker votes yes. Mr. Reamer? Yes. Mr. Reamer votes yes. Mr. Albornoz? Mr. Albornoz votes yes. Mr. Rice? Yes. Mr. Rice votes yes. Mr. Friedson? Yes. Mr. Friedson votes yes. Mr. Katz?
Yes.
Mr. Katz votes yes. Ms. Navarro?
Yes.
Ms. Navarro votes yes.
Thank you. That's unanimous. Great. So now we're on to item number 2, and this is our public hearing action. Declaration of no further need, disposition of land, Hawkins Creamery Road, Gaithersburg Davis Airport, Laytonsville Airport LLC. And for this item, we have one speaker, Alicia Stanley.
Hello, my name is Alicia Stanley, and I'm representing Davis Airport in Laytonsville. We're a small, family-owned public-use airport, and we're asking for your support in allowing the sale of a piece of county property at the end of the runway. A portion of the runway already sits on this land. Owning the property will allow us to extend the runway length, and while it's within FAA minimums, our short runway makes training difficult and leaves little margin of error in the case of emergency. We need to be able to assure pilots and the community of the safest possible conditions. Davis Airport was created in 1946, and it's still at a length that doesn't work as well for more modern airplanes. We'll still be small, and this won't open up the specter of jets or bigger planes, but it will make it safer for the small single-engine airplanes we already serve. It will allow some of the pattern training at Gaithersburg GAI Airport an option to get out of the heavier traffic. The land we're trying to purchase is of little use to anyone else. It's in the airport safety zone and can't be developed. We feel it would be beneficial to the county to have us buy and maintain it. The county will gain a safer air infrastructure system as well as an asset committed to providing needed services. We're working with the public schools and the universities at Shady Grove to provide hands-on education, and the police and fire departments use the facility for training and testing. This is a good thing for us and a good thing for the community. We're also committed to preserving the rural character of the agricultural reserve and aim to be stewards of the land as well as a business. We would like to thank the council, staff, Office of the County Executive, Countryside Alliance, and everyone else who's been working to make safety and preservation coexist. We appreciate the opportunity to be heard and ask for your continued support. Thanks again.
Thank you very much. So we don't have any other speakers for this public hearing. So the public hearing is closed. I see Ms. McMillan in case we have questions. Because I know that this item did not go to committee, so anything you want to add, Ms. McMillan?
Your public hearing, your item on Hawkins Creamery went to GEO and
That's
Fed.
right. Yes, it did.
It's the other item that's later
other
on
one.
consent calendar. So the GEO and Fed committee did have
Yes.
a review of the information, and you unanimously recommended approval.
Yes, we did. Wonderful. Okay, so I need a motion and, and second. I don't know. I thought that if it went to committee, you didn't need that. But that's what it says on my agenda, which is why I got confused. That's okay. All right, so the GO and Fed committee recommended this unanimously. So all those in favor, please raise your hand. All right, that's unanimous. Thank you. All right, expedited bill 28-19, technical corrections. And for this particular item, we don't have any speakers. Action is scheduled later in the afternoon. All right, and then agenda item number 4, expedited bill 26-19, bond authorization. There are no speakers for this hearing, and action is also scheduled later in the afternoon. Okay, so now we are on to item number 5, and this is action. This is resolution regarding spending affordability guidelines for FY21 capital budget and FY21 to 26 capital improvements program. The GO committee recommends approval of a couple of those options. And so what I will say is that we did have a committee meeting on September 26th, and the GO committee recommended unanimously that for GO bonds, we approve scenario 2 in the packet, which is $320 million in FY21, $310 million in FY22, $290 million each in fiscal years 23 to 24, and $280 million each in fiscal years 25 to 26, for a 6-year guideline of $1.77 billion. For park and planning bonds, we approved raising the guidelines for fiscal years 21 to 22 to $8 million, but retained the executive's status quo levels in the out years, which is $6.6 million in FY23 and $6.7 million annually in fiscal years 24 to 26, for a 6-year guideline of $42.7 million. The committee had, I think, a pretty robust conversation about, again, what it is that we're supposed to take into consideration every time we set these guidelines. And of course, it's supposed to be affordability, because we all know that the needs are great. But the issue of affordability is becoming more and more front and center for us as we also take into consideration debt service. And we've had conversations about how we need to begin to ramp down and to start addressing this issue of our debt service. And this particular proposal from the GO committee, again, it's not a drastic reduction, but I think it continues on this trend of addressing this particular growth of our debt service. We also had a conversation with Park and Planning, and Dr. Orland can also expand a little bit more on that conversation, that we felt comfortable to go ahead and approve the $8 million, but assess whether there would be savings realized, because what was shared was that this would be to do things like PLAR and other kinds of proactive maintenance that we think could then result in particular savings. We are aware that maybe we won't have enough years to really assess that, but we retain the ability to come back and raise it if we need to, but thought that at this point in time, this would give us an opportunity to see whether indeed we could realize some savings and still maintain this whole idea of being fiscally prudent, looking into ramping down in general in our spending. So those are the recommendations, and let me turn it over to Dr. Orland. And of course, Mr. Smith also worked on this packet if there's anything else that I missed.
I think you got it all. I think we're here to answer any questions you have.
That's great. All right, any questions from my colleagues? No, it's pretty clear. All right, so I guess we have a GO recommendation. All those in favor, please raise your hand. That is unanimous. Thank you so much. Okay. Now we're on to general business. Any announcements? Ms. Lauer.
Yes, we have an addendum. We're adding an item J to the consent calendar. It's action on amendment to fiscal year 2020 operating budget resolution 19-128, section G, fiscal year 2020 designation of entities for non-competitive contract award status.
And I will say the name.
Thank you.
Educación para Nuestro Futuro, also known as Edu Futuro, Inc.
Thank you.
Not a problem. All right. So also, we did distribute the minutes of September 10th, and also we distributed minutes of the closed sessions of September 10th and 16th. Are there any amendments to those minutes? Hearing none, those stand approved. All right, now to item number 7, and this is our consent calendar. Is there a motion? So moved. Councilmember Katz, and seconded by Councilmember Reamer. Okay, I don't see any lights, so all those in favor of adopting the consent calendar, please raise your hand. All right, that is unanimous. Now, moving right along. Now we're on to item 8, and this is our appointment to the Board of Appeals. So let me call for nominations. I believe Councilmember Reamer, you have? Councilmember Reamer.
All right, I have the pleasure of nominating Bruce Goldenson for reappointment to the seat, and he may not be here, probably busy reading his materials for his next Board of Appeals meeting. But I think my colleagues may join me in saying his comments about his dedication to public service really rang through, and his ongoing years-long commitment to devoting his time to really fulfilling important functions for this county to keep us moving forward in any number of areas has really been appreciated. He's been an outstanding member of the Board of Appeals, and I really am pleased to nominate him for reappointment.
All right, so there's been a motion and a second. All those in favor, please raise your hand. Okay, and that is unanimous. Well, congratulations to Mr. Goldenson. And now we have the second appointment. Sorry. Okay, so for that, Councilmember Albornoz?
I move to nominate Ms. Mary Gonzalez. We were very impressed by her introduction, her testimony and background. She brings a unique set of experiences and is, from her background as an immigrant, will also bring very unique perspective that I think is beneficial to all boards and commissions. And so I'm honored to nominate her this morning or afternoon.
Excellent. Is there a second? Second, Councilmember Hucker, I believe. All right. All those in favor, please raise your hand. And that is unanimous. Congratulations to both Ms. Gonzalez and Mr. Goldenson. Great. Moving right along, we're on to legislative session day 23 continued. This is introduction of bills. And we have Bill 32-19, Health and Sanitation, Flavor Electronic Cigarettes, co-lead sponsors, council members Reamer and Albornoz, also co-sponsor Councilmember Hucker, and I'd like to add myself to that. Public hearing is scheduled for November 5th at 7:30 p.m. Councilmember Katz.
Thank you very much, Madam President. I thought I was a co-sponsor, but if not, could you please add me?
All right. Councilmember Reamer.
Thank you. I'd like to start by thanking Councilmember Albornoz in his work as chair of the HHS committee. He's had a lot of very detailed work and challenging work to address operational issues, but he chose as a major policy initiative one of the most urgent health crises in our country today, which is the crisis of youth vaping. And his leadership moving forward on that issue is, I think, opened the door that many of us are following through behind. And this is an issue that has concerned me for some time, probably somewhat because my oldest son is approaching middle school age, also because I smoked for 20 years of my life. I started as a child at the age of 11, and I don't recommend that. Don't actually share that information at all because I don't want my children to know. Because if they know, then they'll think that that is okay, just as I thought it was okay to smoke because my dad smoked. And that's the way the world works. So I don't typically share that information. Also hope that my parents don't know, quite frankly. Not because I think I'm.
Won't tell anybody.
Please, exactly. I would just appreciate it.
Secret safe.
Circle of trust, knowing that there's only one person watching the video at home.
That one person's my mother. My mother's going to talk to your mother, so you may want to watch out.
Exactly. I mean, I feel my parents would probably be ashamed if they knew that I smoked, for all those years. And of course, it was hell to quit. And at that time, there was a vaping technology. I don't know if I would have chosen to use it. The only thing that enabled me to quit was finally deciding that I had to quit. And it was certainly also being a dad that gave me the motivation. But back to the point, the crisis is that youth vaping is on the rise, and that we spent as a country decades turning the tide on smoking and changing the culture of smoking. And we went from a time when smoking was glamorous and cool and what celebrities and stars did to one where it was looked down upon. And the youngest generation was one that didn't view smoking as something that was desirable or something they wanted to participate in. That has all changed. Smoking is now once again on the rise. Vaping is now once again on the rise. This is the reversal of a decades-long effort to cut down on youth smoking, and the rise is dramatic. Between 2017 and 2018, 1.5 million more students used e-cigarettes. It has climbed, and this is just to 2018. We don't know what the numbers from 2019, but it increased over 78% among high school students and nearly 50% among middle school students. I recognize that for adults, vaping is one solution that may help some quit. I think it helps others persist with their addiction. It helps some quit. There are other solutions to help people quit as well. But I think that flavored products are unquestionably related to the appeal to young people. And in fact, the study, a comprehensive study that was done very recently concluded with the hypothesis that last year's increase in e-cigarette use among youth could be attributable to the use of USB flash drive-like e-cigarettes, including Juul, which have garnered popularity among youth. These products have high nicotine content, appealing flavors, and the ability to be easily concealed and used discreetly. Now, I am aware that the solution that we are putting forward today is a partial solution. It is resting in a power that is a limited power. We can't stop someone from ordering a product on the internet and having it delivered to their home. But I also hope, I think we also hope that the FDA will take action, that the state legislature will take action. And so this is as much an effort to fuel change beyond our reach as it is to make change that we can within our reach. And so I appreciate the council members who have joined me in co-sponsoring this, and I look forward to some number of years from now when we can look back at this as a blip on the radar, and once again the trend is in the correct direction with the decline of tobacco use among young people. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Reamer. Councilmember Albornoz.
So I want to thank Councilmember Reamer for putting this bill forward, honored to co-lead it with him, and I want to thank all my colleagues who have been very committed to this issue. This really is public health in action, and I've been not surprised, but so yet another piece of evidence that this council is doing everything that it can to keep our children and youth safe. By some estimates, there are as many as 7,000 flavors offered, which include things like cotton candy and pina colada and mango, and clearly, and even evidence of this at the federal and state level, is that these products are in many ways targeted to youth, and that's why so many of them are getting their hands on them so quickly. And so every tool that we can use in our toolbox to prevent youth from accessing these products or making it less likely for them to obtain them is something that we should move forward. So look forward to the discussion in the public hearing and appreciate all of my colleagues' support on this bill as well.
Thank you. Councilmember Jawanda.
Thank you, Council President, and thank you to my colleagues, Councilmember Albornoz and Councilmember Reamer, the lead sponsors. I'd like to be added as a co-sponsor. You know, this is unfortunately deja vu. I was working in the U.S. Senate on the Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee when we were trying to get tobacco regulated by the FDA, and I remember holding up and, the Joe Camel pink cigarettes that they were marketing at the time, and it's it's a reminder that if you're going to keep progress going and keep the trends that we have seen in smoking, but then unfortunately going the wrong direction, like Councilmember Reamer said, you need regulation and you need vigilance over time, because this is literally the same playbook. Those colors, those flavors, it's just a different product and a different delivery system that, as of yesterday, 15 deaths in the country and at a minimum. So I want to commend Councilmember Alvarez and Reamer and Hucker and all my colleagues who I know care about this deeply, and we need to do more. The FDA needs to step up, the governor needs to step up, and I think we're going to do everything we can from this dais to ensure the safety of our children, but frankly for all of our residents, because we don't know the long-term health effects of vaping in general. So I thank colleagues, and I'd like to be added as a co-sponsor.
Thank you. Councilmember Glass.
Thank you, Madam President. Also want to echo the sentiments of my colleagues in thanking everybody for working together. What I think is a very complementary set of bills over the last few weeks to make sure that all our residents in Montgomery County are safe, particularly our children. And today is an important day because statewide, the age has been raised to 21 from 18 to ensure that youth do not smoke, can not purchase cigarettes and not purchase vaping materials. But the simple fact is, with flavors like cotton candy and bubble gum, we know that they are tailoring these products to youth, which is why this action is really important. So I commend all my colleagues, and I'd like to be a co-sponsor.
Thank you. All right. So now we are, if I can follow my agenda, we are on item 10B, and this is call of bills for final reading. The first one is Bill 15-19, Contracts and Procurement, Minority-Owned Businesses, Sunset Date Amendments, and the lead sponsor is myself at the request of the County Executive. GO Committee recommends the adoption of this at a 3-0 vote. And basically, this bill is going to extend the time for a disparity study and sunset date for the minority-owned business purchasing program to 2021 due to the lack of funding for the report in the FY20 budget. The current due date for the report was actually July 1st, 2019, and the sunset is December 31st, 2019, which is why it's important to act. We did not have funding in the budget that we just adopted in order to fund the study, and the estimate for that study is about $600,000. The disparity study is required to evaluate the need to continue the minority-owned businesses purchasing program, and it is important to have the study in order to have updated data on the impacts of discrimination against certain minority-owned businesses. It is very difficult to determine whether this program should be sunset or not without that data. This program awards Montgomery County government contracts and subcontracts to qualifying minority-owned businesses. We did have a public hearing on July 9th, and the procurement director, Mr. Shetty, spoke on behalf of the county executive and supported the bill. One of the things that we discussed during our GO session is the executive could transmit a supplemental appropriation after this bill is approved so that we can begin the process of the study. And we actually asked Mr. Shetty if he could please work with the executive in order to get a supplemental our way. And with that, I guess pretty much that sets, that is the report out in terms of what we did during our GO session. And I want to thank Mr. Drummer and Ms. Amanda Myhill for their packet. Councilmember Rice.
Well, thank you very much, Madam President, and I really want to thank you for working with me over the years when it came to increasing the opportunities for minority-owned businesses here in the county. This certainly is something that I hope that we don't take lightly. Again, as we had our conversation around workforce development, one of the ways to combat workforce shortages and to make sure that many people are able to be employed is by growing businesses here in our county. And I certainly appreciate the county executive dusting off an old bill that we had looked at before with local preference, and certainly looking at that. But I would urge that the county executive not devote any funding to anything dealing with workforce development before we do this disparity study. This is incredibly important, and it's something that shouldn't have taken this long. I certainly understand that in transition, when it comes to a new administration, I certainly understand the timeframes that are there, but certainly this is something that needs to happen so that we can understand where we are, where we've gotten when it comes to achieving that equity. And as we are embarking on a racial equity policy, it is going to be imperative that we understand what's happening with our businesses. I know it's something that the county executive has supported when he was here on the council, and so Mr. Tibbetts, I look to you to guide him along in saying this is something that needs to be a part of this year's budget. I will be incredibly disappointed if it's not, because it certainly will signal to our minority business community that it's not a priority when we have this racial equity policy that's right before us, and we're talking about the seriousness of what it is that we want to do. Part of that is addressing this particular issue, and so I look forward to working with you and the county executive to make sure that that funding actually comes to fruition. Thank you very much, Madam President.
Thank you, Councilmember Rice. Okay, this is a roll call vote.
Mr. Glass?
Yes.
Mr. Glass votes yes. Mr. Jawando?
Yes.
Mr. Jawando votes yes. Mr. Hucker?
Yes.
Mr. Hucker votes yes. Mr. Reamer?
Yes.
Mr. Reamer votes yes. Mr. Albornoz?
Yes.
Mr. Albornoz votes yes. Mr. Rice?
Yes.
Mr. Rice votes yes. Mr. Friedson?
Yes.
Mr. Friedson votes yes. Mr. Katz?
Yes.
Mr. Katz votes yes. Ms. Navarro?
Yes.
Ms. Navarro votes yes.
Thank you. That's unanimous. All right, item number 7 is Bill 23-19, Cybersecurity Investment Incentive Tax Credit Supplement Amendments. The Fed Committee recommends enactment. Councilmember Reamer.
Thank you. All right, so this bill is a committee bill that will improve the county cybersecurity tax credit, which is an economic development initiative that is intended to help start or launch new cybersecurity companies. I introduced the initial legislation a number of years ago to create the local tax credit, and it is essentially a companion to the state tax credit. So if the state provides you with a tax credit for your cybersecurity business, then the county will match it. However, the way that the state created it was that the tax credit would flow to the company, and that just turned out to be unworkable or not as effective as originally intended. And so the state changed that to be that the tax credit would flow to the investor. And so this legislation is matching that change as well. The point of this is so that the entrepreneur can seek investors and say to the investor, if you know your investment will essentially be matched or boosted through this tax credit. And so it's a more compelling opportunity for an investor to get involved with a company because their funding will go farther. So this legislation that the committee recommends will, again, adapt our local cybersecurity tax credit to match the state and hopefully help the county succeed with starting more cybersecurity companies, which should be a huge growth area for us in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Friedson.
Thank you. Just wanted to thank Councilmember Reamer for his continued leadership on this, and Councilmember Jawando and I were happy to join him on this effort and just making sure that we're consistent with the state law. But I think it's a part of a broader effort that we need to undertake in order to expand risk capital in Montgomery County to really double down on our core asset here, which is the biohealth and cybersecurity industries. We could lead the world. We should lead the world. And I think what this really does is businesses don't need the incentive. We need folks who are willing to invest in businesses to be incentivized to do so that those businesses can actually get started. This is one small step in that direction, but I'm hopeful that it's one of several steps that we on the Fed Committee and this council can undertake in the months and years ahead.
Thank you. Okay, this is a roll call vote.
Mr. Glass?
Yes.
Mr. Glass votes yes. Mr. Jawando?
Yes.
Mr. Jawando votes yes. Mr. Hucker?
Yes.
Mr. Hucker votes yes. Mr. Reamer?
Yes.
Mr. Reamer votes yes. Mr. Albornoz? Yes. Mr. Albornoz votes yes. Mr. Rice?
Yes.
Mr. Rice votes yes. Mr. Friedson?
Yes.
Mr. Friedson votes yes. Mr. Katz?
Yes.
Mr. Katz votes yes. Ms. Navarro?
Yes.
Ms. Navarro votes yes.
Okay, that is unanimous. Great. So now we are on legislative session day 23. Continue. This is call of bills for final reading. Item 3D is expedited bill 28-19, technical errors. Ms. Myhill.
What you have before you is a bill that we do periodically to correct codification errors in the code, as well as make stylistic changes to outdated provisions. So you have the bill that was introduced before you, as well as a staff amendment on Circle 21 that has 2 additional corrections. And so the council staff recommendation is to enact the bill with the additional corrections.
Thank you so much. Okay, I don't see any lights. I need a motion. Councilmember Hucker, second by Councilmember Reamer. All right, so roll call.
Mr. Glass?
Yes.
Mr. Glass votes yes. Mr. Jawando?
Yes.
Mr. Jawando votes yes. Mr. Hucker? Yes. Mr. Hucker votes yes. Mr. Reamer?
Yes.
Mr. Reamer votes yes. Mr. Albarnos? Yes. Mr. Albarnos votes yes. Mr. Rice?
Yes.
Mr. Rice votes yes. Mr. Friedson?
Yes.
Mr. Friedson votes yes. Mr. Katz?
Yes.
Mr. Katz votes yes. Ms. Navarro?
Yes.
Ms. Navarro votes yes.
Passes unanimously. All right, item number 4 is expedited bill 26-19, bond authorization. And Mr. Smith.
This bill is pretty straightforward. It allows the executive to issue bonds based on the capital improvement program the council approved this year. Every once in a while, the authorization needs to be re-upped for certain public service or public funding categories, and this includes public schools in this one. Staff recommends approval.
Thank you. All right, so I need a motion.
Second.
Moved by Councilmember who? Friedson. Second by Councilmember Rice. All right, so roll call vote.
Mr. Glass?
Yes.
Mr. Glass votes yes. Mr. Jawando?
Yes.
Mr. Jawando votes yes. Mr. Hucker?
Yes.
Mr. Hucker votes yes. Mr. Reamer?
Yes.
Mr. Reamer votes yes. Mr. Albarnos? Yes. Mr. Albarnos votes yes. Mr. Rice?
Yes.
Mr. Rice votes yes. Mr. Friedson? Mr. Friedson votes yes. Mr. Katz?
Yes.
Mr. Katz votes yes. Ms. Navarro?
Yes.
Ms. Navarro votes yes.
All right, following right along, resolution to consolidate previously authorized notes for sale and issuance is a single issue. I need a motion. Moved by Councilmember Rice, seconded by Councilmember Reamer. Mr. Smith.
Continuing with the bill you just approved, or enacted, this resolution allows the executive to take that new authorization and either consolidate it with previous authorization or issue bonds based on what is the best use of those, the best use and timing when needed. So staff recommends approval.
Thank you very much. All right, so this is a majority vote, so all those in favor, please raise your hand. That is unanimous. Thank you so much. All right, District Council session. We have item 13, an announcement. The Planning Board has transmitted the Forest Glen Montgomery Hills Sector Plan, and the public hearing will be held on November 12th, 2019 at 7:30 p.m., and we will be announcing the location soon. Item 14, introduction, Historic Preservation Amendment, 19-1, Historic Resources Preservation Commission, technical corrections, lead sponsor District Council. Public hearing action is scheduled for November 12th at 1:30 p.m. Item 15 is introduction of zoning text amendment 19-07, telecommunications towers, limited use. Lead sponsors, council members Reamer, Albornoz, and Rice. Public hearing will be scheduled at a later date. And then we are now on to Board of Health. Item 16, introduction of resolution to adopt Bill 31-19, Health and Sanitation, Electronic Cigarettes, Distribution, Use, and Possession as a Board of Health regulation. The co-lead sponsors are Councilmembers Hucker and Albornoz, and the co-sponsors are Councilmembers Rice, Katz, Reamer, Glass, Jawando, and Navarro. The public hearing is scheduled for November 5th at 7:30 p.m. And item B is introduction, resolution to adopt Bill 32-19, Health and Sanitation, Flavored Electronic Cigarettes as a Board of Health regulation. The co-lead sponsors are Councilmembers Reamer and Albornoz, co-sponsor Councilmember Hucker, and there are some others. And public hearing is scheduled for November 5th, 2019 at 7:30 p.m. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, we are adjourned. Thank you so much.